Welcome back, everyone, for another deep dive. So you're curious about how Canadian immigration has changed over time.
Seems like it.
Well, you've come to the right place. We've got a whole pile of research here. We're going to be focusing on the period from the 1980s to today.
Oh, wow. That's quite a span of time.
It is, and so much has happened. I mean, did you know that in 2022 alone, Canada's population grew by over 1 million people, largely due to immigration?
Wow. That's a pretty significant jump.
Yeah. So let's rewind a bit and go back to the 1980s, kind of set the stage here.
Okay, sounds good.
What would you say were some of the biggest factors that were shaping immigration policy back then?
Well, I'd say the Immigration Act of 1976 was really a turning point. It kind of laid the groundwork for a lot of the policies we see today, with a focus on family reunification, attracting skilled workers, and offering refuge to those in need.
Right, and it was also around this time that multiculturalism became official Canadian policy. It seems like such a bold statement, for that time.
It was. It was a significant shift, recognizing the growing diversity of the Canadian population and really embracing it. This move, of course, sparked all sorts of discussions about national identity and integration, but it ultimately reshaped the Canadian fabric.
It definitely did. It's interesting how policies often reflect broader societal shifts, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. They kind of go hand in hand.
So we've got these progressive policies in place, but then the 1990s hit, and the economic climate kind of throws a wrench in things.
Yeah, the economic downturn in the 90s definitely led to a slowdown in immigration. Governments were under pressure to kind of prioritize jobs for Canadians, so immigration targets were adjusted accordingly.
It's interesting, though, because even with those economic challenges, Canada still introduced some pretty big policy changes, like the provincial nominee program or
the PNP. That emerged as a way to address those regional economic disparities we see in Canada, and also to respond to the needs of each province's specific labor market.
So provinces got more say in who they wanted to invite.
Exactly. So, for example, let's say a province has a shortage of nurses. They could use the PNP to prioritize applications from internationally trained nurses.
So it's like fine-tuning the immigration system to better match each province's needs.
Exactly.
Were there any concerns about this shift, though, towards more regional control?
Oh, for sure. There were concerns about potential inconsistencies between provinces and whether some provinces might end up being more welcoming than others. It raised questions about fairness and equity in the immigration process, which is a debate that continues today.
Right. And then you've got these major global events happening in the backdrop, like the Kosovo crisis, which really tested Canada's humanitarian response.
Absolutely. That was a defining moment. Seeing those images of refugees fleeing the conflict really resonated with a lot of Canadians. And the government responded by resettling thousands of Kosovar refugees.
It's amazing how these global crises can kind of reshape our understanding of, our role in the world, right?
Yeah, it's a real example of Canada stepping up on the world stage and living up to its humanitarian ideals.
It feels like this commitment to humanitarian aid is a recurring theme in Canadian immigration policy.
It definitely is.
So as we head into the 2000s, things seem to shift back into growth mode, right?
Right, exactly. By the early 2000s, the Canadian economy was rebounding, and the focus was on attracting immigrants to keep that growth going. Immigration targets were raised quite a bit, reaching over 200,000 per year.
Wow. What was driving that demand?
Well, a few things. The Canadian population was aging, leading to concerns about a shrinking workforce. Also, certain industries were experiencing labor shortages, especially sectors like agriculture and technology.
So they needed more people to fill those jobs.
Yeah, basically. Immigration became a way to tackle those demographic and economic challenges, and we also saw the expansion of temporary worker programs during this time.
Which, of course, came with their own set of debates around worker rights and exploitation. What were some of the main concerns there?
Well, a big one was making sure temporary workers were getting fair wages and decent working conditions. There were, unfortunately, some cases of employers taking advantage of their situation. So there were calls for stronger protections and better oversight.
And then 911 happened, which obviously had a massive impact on immigration around the world.
Absolutely. 9/11 changed everything. Canada, like many other countries, implemented stricter security measures, which definitely impacted immigration policies.
In what ways? What kind of changes did people actually experience firsthand?
Well, for one, visa applications, especially from certain countries, faced way more scrutiny. Background checks became a lot more rigorous, and the time it took to process applications, well, it often increased. And at the border, you saw more security personnel, and travelers had to answer a lot more questions, go through more intensive screening. I mean, it was understandable given the circumstances, but it definitely added a layer of anxiety and delay for a lot of people.
So you've got this period of growth, but also a lot of change and uncertainty. And then we enter the 2010s, which is a decade of tech advancements, new policies, and, well, a whole lot more.
Yeah, the 2010s were definitely a turning point in a lot of ways. We saw the rise of social media, the global financial crisis, and of course the Arab Spring, which had a significant impact on migration patterns. And domestically, Canada was grappling with its own set of challenges, like the housing affordability crisis and the growing climate change movement. All of this had a ripple effect on immigration policies and debates.
And in the middle of all that, we get the express entry system in 2015.
Right, the express entry system, that was a big one. It was designed to streamline the process and attract skilled workers faster, making the system more responsive to the needs of the labor market. It was a pretty significant shift.
Could you break it down a bit, though? How does it actually work? What makes someone a good candidate under this new system?
Sure. It's essentially a points-based system.
Yeah.
Candidates get points based on things like their age, their education, work experience, language skills, and adaptability. And of course, having a job offer in Canada gives you a huge advantage.
So it's not just about what you know, but also your potential to succeed in Canada.
Exactly. And there's actually a tool on the government website where people can punch in their info and get an estimated score.
So you know where you stand.
Yeah, exactly. It helps people figure out if they need to boost their score in certain areas. It's all online, too, so it's pretty efficient.
Okay. And while all this is happening, another major event unfolds. The Syrian Refugee Crisis. And Canada steps up again, resettling over 25,000 Syrian refugees.
Right. It was another defining moment for Canada. The scale of the crisis was just immense, and Canada's response was seen as a really positive example of humanitarian leadership.
And it seemed like the public really rallied behind it, too.
They did. There was an incredible outpouring of support. People were donating, volunteering their time, offering housing. It was really heartwarming to see.
So by the time we reach the 2020s, it feels like Canadian immigration is already in a state of constant change, evolving with economic realities and humanitarian crises. Then, of course, the pandemic hits.
And the pandemic, well, that was a whole other curveball, wasn't it?
It certainly was. We'll have to dig into that more after the break. But before we do, what would you say are some of the key takeaways from these first few decades of modern Canadian immigration history?
Well, one thing that strikes me is just how consistently Canada has tried to balance its economic needs with its humanitarian goals. I mean, it's a delicate balance for sure, and it's been shaped by so many things: global events, the economy, and changing values. And we've also seen how the immigration system itself has become so much more complex, hasn't it? With all these new programs and different ways of selecting people. But at the end of the day, it's clear that immigration has played a huge role in shaping Canada, its economy, its workforce, its culture. It's a story of change, adaptation, and this ongoing effort to create a welcoming and prosperous society.
I completely agree. And it's a story that's far from over. We'll be back after the break to explore what happens next.
It's interesting, isn't it, how Canada's immigration story really reflects what's happening globally.
Yeah, it feels like almost every country is trying to figure out this whole immigration thing, how to make it work for everyone.
Absolutely. It's a global puzzle with a lot of pieces to consider.
And speaking of pieces, one of our sources actually breaks down Canadian immigration into these distinct categories. I thought it was interesting how it really highlights the different goals and priorities.
It's important to understand those categories. They're key to how Canada manages immigration. Let's start with economic immigrants. This category focuses on selecting people based on their skills and education, those who are likely to contribute to Canada's economy. Think doctors, engineers, IT specialists.
So basically, they're looking for people who can fill those gaps in the labor market that we were talking about earlier, making sure the Canadian economy has the talent it needs.
Exactly. But then you have family reunification, which has been a core part of Canadian immigration policy for a long time.
Yeah, keeping families together just makes sense.
It does. It allows Canadian citizens and permanent residents to sponsor their close family members to come to Canada. It's really about recognizing the importance of family ties, and it reflects the social and humanitarian aspects of the immigration system.
Right. Strong families make strong communities. And of course, we can't forget about refugees, those seeking safety and protection.
Right. Canada has a long-standing commitment to providing a safe haven for refugees. as a vital part of our international identity and reputation.
And over the years, we've seen these categories change and adapt to new circumstances. Like the focus on economic immigration has definitely become more prominent lately. Why do you think that is?
Well, it's directly tied to those changing demographics and the realities of the Canadian economy we talked about. With the population aging and the birth rate declining, attracting skilled workers becomes even more crucial for the economy to grow. It's a challenge a lot of developed countries are facing, actually.
So it's not just about numbers. It's about thinking long-term, ensuring the country's future prosperity.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But it's not just about getting people here. It's also about how they integrate into Canadian society.
Right. Integration, yeah. It's a two-way street, isn't it? Both newcomers and the receiving society need to adapt and make adjustments for it to work.
Exactly. It's about finding ways to bridge those cultural differences and create a sense of belonging.
What would you say are some of the key ingredients for successful integration?
Oh, there are so many factors. But language skills are definitely up there. It's essential for newcomers to find jobs, access services, and just connect with their communities. But it's not just language. Things like access to affordable housing, having your foreign credentials recognized, and having support networks within your community, those all play a part too.
It's a lot to navigate, especially when you're in a new country with a new language and culture. What kind of help is available for newcomers?
Canada has a whole network of settlement service organizations across the country. They offer a range of support services like language classes, employment assistance, help finding housing, navigating the healthcare system, even social and cultural activities so newcomers can connect with others.
It sounds like a real team effort. The government, community organizations, and of course, the newcomers themselves all playing their part.
Absolutely.
But even with all that support, there must be challenges. I mean, cultural differences, different ways of communicating, those can lead to misunderstandings.
Definitely. Integration isn't always smooth. And you're right, cultural differences can be tricky. It takes time, patience, and a willingness to learn from each other. And unfortunately, we have to acknowledge that racism and discrimination exist in Canada, as they do everywhere.
And those can create huge barriers for newcomers.
They really can. It's a reminder that we constantly need to work towards creating a society that's truly inclusive and equitable. Policies are a good start, but they're not enough on their own.
It's an ongoing process, for sure. Okay, so we've talked about the history, the categories, integration. Now let's get into the economics of it all.
The economic impact of immigration is a fascinating topic. It's something that's been studied a lot. And there's generally a consensus that immigration has a positive effect on the Canadian economy.
Makes sense. You have skilled workers coming in, filling jobs, contributing to productivity. But how does that actually work on a bigger scale?
Well, for one, newcomers often start businesses, which creates jobs, not just for themselves, but for others too. They also pay taxes, which supports public services, and they increase consumer spending, which stimulates economic activity in various sectors.
Don't forget the cultural side of things, too. That vibrancy that immigrants bring can boost tourism, attract investment, make everything more dynamic.
You're absolutely right. Those cultural and social contributions are harder to measure, but they're definitely a big part of the overall positive impact.
Now, I know there are also arguments against immigration. Some people worry about it driving down wages or creating more competition for jobs. How much weight do those arguments hold?
It's understandable why people have those concerns. But most economic research actually suggests that the impact of immigration on wages is pretty minimal. Some studies even show that immigration can lead to higher wages for everyone in the long run. How? Well, newcomers often fill jobs Canadians aren't willing or able to do. That frees up Canadian workers to move into higher skilled, higher paying positions. And newcomers also bring fresh skills and ideas, boosting innovation and entrepreneurship.
So it's not a zero-sum game.
Not at all. It's about making the economy more dynamic, more productive, so everyone benefits.
But what about the strain on public services, healthcare, education, all that? If the population's growing quickly because of immigration, can those systems keep up?
That's a valid concern for sure. It highlights how important it is to invest in infrastructure and plan carefully. If Canada wants to reap the benefits of immigration, it needs to make sure its public services have the resources to handle a growing population.
It's all about finding that sweet spot, isn't it, where immigration benefits everyone.
It really is.
Okay, so we've talked about the economic side. Now let's shift gears a bit and talk politics, because immigration is a pretty hot-button political issue, right?
Oh, for sure, both in Canada and around the world.
And it seems like there's a whole spectrum of opinions on it, from those who support open borders to those who want stricter limits. How does all that political back and forth affect the conversation? And how does it influence actual policy decisions?
Well, it creates this really complex and often polarized environment. You have different perspectives clashing. And there are valid concerns on all sides of the issue. Some people are worried about immigration changing the national identity or about its effect on cultural values. Others worry about the pressure on social services. And then you have those who advocate for more open, more compassionate immigration policies. They emphasize the humanitarian and economic benefits of welcoming newcomers. It's a lot to untangle.
How do we even begin to have productive conversations about it then, with all those different viewpoints?
I think it starts with recognizing that there are legitimate concerns on every side of the issue. We need to move past those overly simplistic narratives and have respectful conversations. Conversations that are based on facts and evidence-based research, with a shared goal of building a strong and successful Canada.
Sounds pretty idealistic. But hey, it's something to strive for. It's easy to forget sometimes that behind all the numbers and policies, there are real people.
You're right. People with their own hopes and dreams and stories.
And speaking of stories, I think it's time to dive into a specific example that really highlights a lot of what we've been discussing.
Okay, what are you thinking?
The Syrian Refugee Crisis and Canada's response.
That's a great example. The Syrian Refugee Crisis really gives us a powerful lens to examine Canada's humanitarian commitment and its integration efforts. It shows the challenges and the rewards that come with welcoming newcomers, especially during a global crisis.
Okay, so let's go back to 2015. The Syrian civil war had been going on for years at that point, and the world was dealing with this massive refugee crisis. You know, you couldn't turn on the news without seeing those images of families leaving everything behind.
It was heartbreaking. A really stark reminder of the devastating human cost of war.
And Canada, with Justin Trudeau as Prime Minister, made this big commitment to resettle 25,000 Syrian refugees.
It was a bold move, and it definitely got the world's attention.
It was a huge national effort, wasn't it? I remember Canadians all over the country stepping up to help.
Yeah, it really brought people together. There was this feeling that we had to do something, We had to help.
But even with all the good intentions in the world, resettling that many people is a massive undertaking. I mean, just logistically, how did Canada handle things like housing, healthcare, education, all of that?
It was a huge challenge. It required a lot of coordination. The government worked with settlement agencies, community groups, even just regular people. They were trying to mobilize resources, find housing, provide essential services. It wasn't perfect, but it showed how Canadians can work together when it matters.
And I imagine the language barrier is a big hurdle for a lot of those refugees.
Oh, absolutely. Language was, and still is, a major challenge. Interpreters were crucial, of course, and language classes were offered to help newcomers learn English or French as quickly as possible. But it takes time. It's a process, which really emphasizes how important language training and those support services are.
It's a journey, not a sprint.
Exactly.
But amid all the challenges, there must have been some incredible moments too. Stories of connection and shared humanity. Are there any that stick out in your mind?
So many, yeah. There was this one story I read about. A Syrian family arrived in a small town in Nova Scotia, and the whole community just embraced them. They helped them find a place to live, got them furniture, helped them find jobs. The kids were enrolled in the local school right away, and the parents started taking English classes with volunteer tutors. It was amazing. Just a small town showing incredible kindness.
I love that. It's a reminder that even in the face of global crises, these little acts of kindness can make a huge difference. But we also have to acknowledge that not everything went smoothly, right? I'm sure there were tensions, challenges along the way.
Oh, definitely. It wasn't all sunshine and roses. Some cities struggled with housing shortages. Some social services were stretched thin. There were definitely cultural misunderstandings, even prejudice.
It's a reminder that even in a country like Canada, known for being welcoming, integration takes work.
It does. It's a constant process of learning, adapting, and facing those uncomfortable truths.
It's not about pretending everything's perfect. It's about acknowledging the challenges and working to overcome them.
Exactly. And I think the response to the Syrian refugee crisis showed how Canada, at its best, can be welcoming and compassionate, even when things are tough.
It really does. And it highlights those humanitarian values that are so central to how Canada approaches immigration. But there's an economic side to this story too, right? I mean, a lot of those refugees have become contributing members of society.
Absolutely. They're starting businesses, filling jobs that need filling, bringing new skills to the workforce, and they're contributing to the culture, making communities more vibrant.
So it's not just about helping people in need, it's also about recognizing the potential that each newcomer brings.
Exactly. It's about creating a situation where everyone benefits.
I think the Syrian refugee crisis holds some valuable lessons for Canada as we continue to grapple with immigration in the 21st century. It shows how important it is to be ready to respond to these humanitarian crises in a way that's both compassionate and effective.
And it reminds us that successful integration requires strong partnerships between the government, community organizations, and everyday people.
And it also emphasizes the human side of this whole thing. It's not just about numbers, it's about people, their stories, their resilience.
Their contributions to making a better future.
Well, this has been a fascinating deep dive. We've explored how Canadian immigration has changed over the years, talked about the different categories, the integration process, all the economic and humanitarian aspects. It's a complex topic.
It is. And we've seen how global events, the economy, and changing social values have shaped the policies. How Canada tries to find that balance between looking out for its own needs and helping others.
What stands out to you as the biggest takeaway from all of this?
For me, it's that tension between pragmatism and compassion. It really seems to define how Canada deals with immigration, trying to attract skilled workers for the economy while also offering refuge to those in need. It's tough, but it reflects who we are as a nation.
I like that. And as we move forward, this conversation needs to continue. We've got to keep asking those hard questions, challenge our assumptions, and work together to create an immigration system that works. A system that's fair, equitable, and reflects the best of Canada.
It's not just a Canadian issue either, it's a global one. We're all trying to figure this out, and I think the things Canada has learned can be valuable for others. It's a reminder that even in a world that feels chaotic sometimes, we can choose compassion, choose collaboration, and build a future where everyone has a chance to thrive.
That's a great note to end on. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into Canadian immigration. It's a story that's still being written, and we hope you stay engaged, stay informed, and help shape what comes next.